a slab in 3 tongues. In 1799, on the dusty banks of the Nile near the town of Rashid, which French soldiers would mispronounce as Rosetta, a fragment of dark granodiorite was pulled from the earth. It was rectangular, heavy, and cracked, its edges chipped from centuries of neglect. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than a broken monument, but etched upon its surface were 3 distinct bands of text, elegant hieroglyphs at the top, smooth demotic script in the middle, and familiar Greek letters below. No one at the time could have imagined that this single slab would become the key to unlocking the lost language of the pharaohs. For more than 1,400 years, hieroglyphs had been a sealed door. Egyptian temples, tombs, and monuments were covered in this sacred writing, yet no one could read a single line. Medieval travellers saw them as symbols of magic. Renaissance thinkers guessed wildly, turning birds and eyes into allegories of hidden wisdom. By Napoleon's era, Egypt was an ancient puzzle, breathtaking in scale, but mute. The Rosetta Stone changed everything. The presence of Greek was the first clue. Scholars realized the 3 scripts likely conveyed the same decree. If Greek could be read, then Demotic might be deciphered, and eventually hieroglyphs. But the real breakthrough came not from France, where the stone was found, but from England. Jean-François Champollion, a brilliant linguist obsessed with Egypt since childhood, spent years poring over the inscriptions. In 1822, he announced what had eluded humanity for centuries. Hieroglyphs were not mere symbols, but a complex blend of phonetic and ideographic signs. This insight cracked the code open like a long-sealed tomb. There's a lesser-known twist, though. When the British defeated the French, the stone was seized as spoils of war and shipped to London. Today it rests in the British Museum, a silent witness to both linguistic triumph and colonial rivalry. Some fringe claims suggest the stone itself might have been part of an earlier temple archive, or even a remnant of Ptolemaic propaganda meant to stabilize Egypt under foreign rulers. Scholars still debate whether Champollion's achievement was solely his, or whether earlier researchers like Thomas Young laid the essential groundwork. What's certain is that once hieroglyphs could be read, Egypt's history transformed from myth into text. Royal decrees, funerary prayers, daily records. Suddenly, an entire civilization began to speak again. It's hard to overstate the impact. Imagine being handed the key to a library no one has opened for centuries. Temples across the Nile Valley became readable. Pharaohs were no longer just names on monuments. They were rulers with voices, ambitions, and edicts. The Rosetta Stone didn't just solve a mystery. It resurrected a world, ashes, beneath the waves. Long before the name Atlantis captured European imaginations, a real island civilization flourished in the Aegean Sea. Around 1600 BCE, the volcanic island of Thera, modern-day Santorini, was home to an advanced Minoan settlement. Its paved streets, multi-storied buildings, frescoed walls, and intricate plumbing were centuries ahead of their time. Then, suddenly, it disappeared. For generations, poets, philosophers, and archaeologists puzzled over what had happened to this prosperous outpost. Legends grew, of floods sent by gods, of a city swallowed whole by the sea. It became one of the great enduring mysteries of the ancient world. The answer, it turned out, lay deep beneath layers of ash and pumice. In the mid-20th century, excavations at Akrotiri revealed entire buildings preserved like a Bronze Age Pompeii. Archaeologists found furniture, frescoes of dolphins and lilies, jars still fragrant with spices, and an eerie absence of human remains. Something catastrophic had driven the inhabitants away. Geologists traced the culprit. Thera's volcano had erupted with unimaginable force, one of the largest eruptions in recorded history. Ash clouds darkened skies across the eastern Mediterranean. Tsunamis swept over Crete, striking Minoan harbours and cities. For centuries, this eruption was suspected but unproven. Ice cores from Greenland later showed a spike in volcanic debris dated to roughly the same period. Tree rings across the northern hemisphere recorded a sudden, sharp cooling. These clues converged on one event, the Thera eruption. It didn't merely damage the Minoans, it destabilized the trade networks and political systems they relied upon, creating a chain reaction that weakened their power. A quirky twist often overlooked, some fringe theorists argued Thera was Atlantis itself, Plato's allegorical lost civilization. While that's a romantic exaggeration, the scale of the disaster may well have inspired parts of the myth, transmitted orally across centuries until it reached Greek philosophers. Scholars still debate whether the eruption alone caused the collapse of Minoan society. Some argue that Mycenaean invaders from mainland Greece finished what nature began. Others point to earthquakes that preceded the eruption, suggesting a 1-2 punch that no civilization could survive. What's certain is that the Minoans never regained their former glory. Today, walking through the silent streets of Akrotiri, with walls still bearing vivid murals of a vanished world, the air feels heavy with both loss and revelation. The sea laps quietly against Santorini's caldera, a reminder of the day when the island exploded, reshaping history, and perhaps inspiring one of humanity's greatest legends, ghosts beneath the stones. For centuries, Stonehenge stood like a riddle carved into the English landscape. The towering trilithons, arranged in their enigmatic ring, have lured travellers, mystics, scholars, and conspiracy theorists alike. Who built this monument? How did they transport stones weighing up to 25 tons across dozens of miles? And perhaps most tantalizing of all, why? The site has been romanticized as a druid temple, an alien landing pad, a cosmic observatory. But beneath the windswept plain of Salisbury, the ground itself held the real clues. In recent decades, science, not legend, has begun to whisper answers. DNA analysis from ancient burials unearthed near the site revealed that some of Stonehenge's earliest builders were migrants. They traced their origins to regions that are today part of western France and the Iberian Peninsula. These weren't just local farmers erecting stones, they were part of a broader wave of Neolithic migration that swept across Europe thousands of years before written history. Isotopic studies of teeth from skeletons buried in the area showed some individuals had grown up hundreds of kilometres away, hinting at networks of movement and exchange long before Roman roads. Equally surprising was the origin of the stones themselves. The smaller blue stones were traced to quarries in the Preseli Hills of Wales, roughly 150 miles away. Archaeologists found evidence of rough-hewn pillars and ancient stone cutting at those remote sites, suggesting that these stones were deliberately quarried, shaped, and somehow transported to Salisbury Plain. The prevailing theory today is that they were moved using a combination of wooden sledges, rollers, ropes, and perhaps river transport along ancient waterways. A fascinating, quirky detail, one of the earliest skeletons buried near Stonehenge, known as the Amesbury Archer, was found with gold ornaments, ornaments, copper knives, and a flint wrist guard. Isotope analysis revealed he had grown up in the Alpine region, modern Switzerland or Germany. He was buried around 2300 BCE, roughly contemporary with Stonehenge's major construction phase. His presence suggests that the monument was already a magnet for distant peoples, not just locals. Scholars still debate whether Stonehenge's purpose was primarily ceremonial, astronomical, funerary, or a fusion of all three. Some argue it was a massive ancestral monument marking seasonal changes. Others think it functioned as a healing centre or a unifying site for scattered communities. What's clear is that it was built by real people, skilled, mobile, and deeply connected across regions, rather than by mystical priesthoods or extraterrestrial engineers. As evening fog curls around the megaliths today, the monument's mystery hasn't vanished, but it has transformed. The stones no longer feel like the work of unknown hands. They speak of migrations, craftsmanship, and a shared human vision reaching across distance and time, drawing the sky without leaving the ground. High on the arid plains of southern Peru, the desert stretches like a blank parchment. It's here, etched into the sun-baked earth, that hundreds of enormous shapes emerge when viewed from above. Colossal hummingbirds, spiraling monkeys, straight lines stretching for miles. For centuries, the Nazca lines confounded explorers. Why build something you can only see from the sky? Asked early pilots in the 1920s, astonished as they flew over the geometric and animal forms. Alien landing strips, celestial calendars, messages to gods. Speculation flourished, while the true story lay quietly beneath the dust. Modern archaeology has finally brought that story to light. The Nazca people, who flourished between 200 BCE and 600 CE, created these geoglyphs by simply removing the thin, rust-coloured top layer of pebbles to expose the pale soil beneath. This clever method, combined with the stable, dry desert climate, preserved the images for nearly 2 millennia. Far from requiring aircraft, the lines could be planned and executed using basic surveying tools, wooden stakes and cords, to keep lines straight and curves precise. Excavations have even uncovered some of these ancient stakes still embedded at key points, quiet witnesses to methodical human design. One striking fact, many of the lines align not with stars but with water sources. In such an unforgiving landscape, water meant life. Scholars now believe several of the straight lines may have functioned as ritual walkways leading to wells and aqueducts, part of ceremonies intended to beckon rain or honour deities controlling water. Some animal figures, like the hummingbird and spider, are thought to have symbolic links to fertility and weather, reinforcing this interpretation. There's a quirky twist too. In the mid-20th century, a German mathematician named Maria Reiche devoted her life to studying and preserving the lines. She single-handedly mapped vast portions of the plateau, often working in isolation, measuring each figure by hand, convinced they formed a vast astronomical calendar. While later research revised many of her conclusions, her meticulous surveys laid the groundwork for understanding how precise these designs really were. Scholars still debate whether the geoglyphs had one fixed meaning or evolved over time. Some argue they marked pilgrimage routes and ceremonial spaces rather than serving as literal messages to the heavens. Others see them as landscape-scale offerings, drawings meant not to be viewed from the sky, but to be walked, experienced, and inhabited from the ground. Standing there today, the wind dry and constant, it's easy to see why earlier generations turned to fantastical explanations. The desert is flat, the figures enormous, their lines crisp against the pale earth. Yet the real story is more profound than alien runways. It's one of ingenuity, faith, and a people who inscribed their relationship with the cosmos and the land directly into the fabric of the earth. Colours that time stole. In 1974, farmers digging a well near Xi'an, China, struck something far stranger than stone. They unearthed the first fragments of what would become one of the most astonishing archaeological discoveries of the 20th century, the terracotta army. Thousands of life-sized warriors, archers, chariots and horses, buried in orderly ranks, guarded the vast tomb of China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, who unified the warring states in 221 BCE. But what stunned researchers wasn't just the scale of the army. It was the traces of brilliant colour still clinging to the clay. Once, these figures weren't drab grey. They were painted in vivid reds, purples, greens, blues and whites. For centuries, the statues lay entombed in darkness, their pigments preserved by isolation. But the moment they were exposed to air, the colours began to flake and vanish within minutes. This heartbreaking phenomenon delayed full excavation for years. Early figures lost nearly all their paint almost instantly after discovery, leaving only ghostly hints of their former splendour. The mystery of how to preserve these fragile pigments became nearly as pressing as understanding the warriors themselves. Modern chemical analysis finally provided answers. The pigments used included Chinese purple, one of the earliest synthetic pigments in history, along with cinnabar red, malachite green, and azurite blue. Beneath these pigments lay a thin lacquer layer made from the sap of the Chinese lacquer tree. This lacquer acted as a binding agent, but also made the paint vulnerable. When it dried out after exposure to air, it cracked and pulled the pigment away. A fascinating fringe detail. Some scholars once speculated the army had been deliberately buried without colour, the traces appearing later through mineral staining. Others even claimed the hues were a modern hoax added after discovery. These theories collapsed under rigorous testing, which confirmed the pigment's ancient origin and remarkable sophistication. To solve the preservation problem, scientists developed rapid polymer coatings and portable conservation labs to stabilize the paint in situ the moment figures are uncovered. This combination of chemistry and archaeology now allows new warriors to retain their original colors, at least partially, offering glimpses into how dazzling the full army must have appeared 2 millennia ago. Scholars still debate whether each figure was painted individually to represent real soldiers or whether the colors followed standardized military patterns. Subtle variations in facial features and hairstyles suggest a blend of mass production and individual detailing. If so, this painted host was not merely symbolic. It may have mirrored the emperor's real army with eerie accuracy. Today, when visitors walk through the excavation halls, they often imagine the warriors as they appear, rows of earthen grey figures. But picture, instead, an army in riotous colour, ranks of red-armoured infantry, purple-robed officers, gleaming blue-green chariots, all arranged with military precision, silent and eternal. Time stole their colours, but science is giving them back, one soldier at a time. The immortal mixture, the Roman Empire built as if time itself were an enemy to be conquered. Roads spanned continents, aqueducts carried water across valleys, harbours sheltered fleets, and their concrete structures have endured for nearly 2 millennia, outlasting many modern buildings. For generations, the formula behind Roman concrete was a mystery. How could their harbours still stand after centuries of battering by the sea while modern concrete crumbles within decades? The secret lay not in some mythical ingredient, but in chemistry far ahead of its time. The puzzle began with a simple observation. Roman concrete, unlike modern Portland cement, actually seemed to heal itself. Cracks formed, but over time they sealed. In places like the ancient harbour of Cosa and the Pantheon's massive dome, engineers found that water infiltration didn't weaken the structures, it strengthened them. Scientists examined ancient concrete under microscopes and found strange white lumps embedded within the mix. For years, these inclusions were dismissed as sloppy workmanship. Then, recently, a team of researchers from MIT and Europe realized these lumps were the key. The Romans used a technique called hot mixing, combining quicklime with volcanic ash and rubble. When water later entered the concrete through cracks, it reacted with these lime clasts, forming new minerals that sealed the fissures. Essentially, the concrete was designed to repair itself from the inside. Volcanic ash, particularly from the Bay of Naples, added pozzolanic properties that bound everything together, even in seawater. This is why Roman piers still stand today, their structure actually reinforced by centuries of marine chemical reactions. A quirky detail: Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century CE, casually mentioned that Roman concrete became a single stone mass, impregnable to the waves, facenti. Modern engineers thought he was simply boasting. they had no idea he was describing a genuinely superior technology that we only fully understood 2,000 years later. Some fringe theories once claimed the Romans used secret organic additives like blood or milk to strengthen their concrete. While fun to imagine, modern analysis has found no evidence for such ingredients. The genius was entirely mineral. Scholars still debate whether this knowledge was widespread among Roman builders or limited to elite projects under imperial oversight. After the empire's fall, the technique was lost. Medieval builders reverted to weaker lime mortars. Only now are researchers attempting to replicate Roman methods for sustainable modern construction, aiming for materials that last centuries rather than decades. Standing beneath the Pantheon's dome, still the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world, one can feel the weight of both stone and knowledge. The Romans didn't just build monuments, they built chemistry into architecture. Their immortal mixture wasn't magic, it was engineering genius, rediscovered just in time for a world looking once again toward durability over speed. Stones that walked themselves. On a remote speck of land in the South Pacific, Rapa Nui, better known as Easter Island, hundreds of massive stone statues stand watch. These moai, some weighing more than 80 tons, have become icons of mystery. How did a small, isolated community with no wheels or beasts of burden move such colossal figures across miles of rugged terrain? For centuries, the prevailing image was one of desperation, islanders dragging statues on wooden sledges, cutting down their forests in the process, sealing their own ecological doom. Others, less grounded theories invoked supernatural help or even extraterrestrials, but the real answer lay hidden in the statues themselves. Closer examination revealed something remarkable. The moai were designed to move upright. Unlike finished statues seen today on stone platforms, many moai found along ancient roads have a subtle forward-leaning posture and rounded bases. These weren't flaws, they were features. In 2012, a team of archaeologists and engineers led by Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo put this theory to the test. Using ropes and a small team of people, they rocked a replica statue forward in a carefully choreographed rhythm, a kind of giant stone walking. It worked. The statue swayed side to side like a refrigerator being inched across a kitchen floor, stepping forward without dragging. This discovery transformed our understanding of Rapa Nui engineering. Rather than a society straining itself to disaster, the people likely relied on social coordination, precise carving, and deep knowledge of leverage. The roads themselves supported this theory. They were gently sloped, cleared pathways leading from the quarry at Rano Raraku to various ceremonial sites, with statues often abandoned mid-route, perhaps during social upheaval. A fascinating twist. Local oral traditions long insisted that the moai had walked to their places. Early European visitors dismissed these as myths, but the islanders weren't describing magic. They were recalling engineering techniques in poetic language. There's still debate over whether all statues were moved upright or if some were transported horizontally on sledges. Different periods or communities may have used different methods, but the walking theory has gained significant traction, supported by physical evidence on the statues and the landscape. Another overlooked detail is how this technology intersected with society. Moving moai wasn't just logistics, it was ritual. Coordinated teams likely chanted and worked in rhythm, transforming transport into ceremony. The act of walking a statue may have been as symbolically significant as its final placement on a platform. Today, when you see rows of silent moai gazing inland, their stillness can trick you. But once, these giants moved, swaying step by step, guided by hands, ropes, and voices. No aliens, no lost magic, just ingenuity, rhythm, and stone. Navigating the invisible. Centuries before the magnetic compass reached Europe, Viking longships cut through the grey waters of the North Atlantic with astonishing accuracy. They travelled from Scandinavia to Iceland, Greenland, and even North America, voyages that required skill, not luck. The question puzzled historians for years. How did these seafarers navigate when the skies were overcast and the sun was hidden? The sagas hinted at something strange, solarstein, or sunstone, a mysterious crystal said to reveal the sun's position even on cloudy days. For generations this was dismissed as myth, but archaeology, mineralogy, and a few clever experiments have changed that. The key lay in Iceland's spar, a form of calcite crystal. When light passes through this crystal, it polarizes, splitting into two beams. By rotating the crystal and observing the brightness of the beams, navigators could determine the direction of the sun with surprising accuracy, even through thick cloud cover or twilight. Experiments in the early 21st century demonstrated that trained users could pinpoint the sun's position within a few degrees, using nothing more than a clear crystal and careful observation. A quirky historical twist emerged in 2013 when a calcite crystal was found among the wreckage of the Elizabethan warship Alderney, sunk off the Channel Islands in 1592. The ship was centuries younger than the Vikings, but the crystal's location near the navigational instruments suggested that such stones might have been used well into the age of sail, perhaps as backups when compasses were unreliable. The Vikings, with their mastery of the North Atlantic, would have found this technology invaluable. On clear days, they used sun compasses and the position of the sun. On cloudy days, the sunstone could see what the human eye could not. Combined with intimate knowledge of currents, bird flight paths, and wave patterns, this made for a sophisticated navigational system. Scholars still debate how widespread sunstone use actually was. Some argue it was reserved for elite navigators on special voyages. Others suggest it was a common tool among long-distance sailors. There's also debate about whether different crystals, such as cordierite or tourmaline, might have been used in addition to Iceland's spar, depending on availability. Regardless, the image of Vikings as reckless raiders blown off course has given way to something far more impressive. They were technologists of light, using natural optics centuries before the science of polarization was understood. Standing on the deck of a recreated longship today, surrounded by endless grey sea and sky, it's not hard to imagine the helmsman holding a glimmering crystal aloft, slowly rotating it, watching the split beams, and calling out the sun's hidden position. The voyage continues, not by luck, but by knowledge. Knowledge carved not in stone, but in light itself. A hanging garden, misplaced. For centuries, the hanging gardens of Babylon have lingered in the imagination like a half-remembered dream. Classical writers describe them as an impossible oasis, tiered terraces dripping with exotic trees and vines, a lush green mountain rising above the dry plains of Mesopotamia. They were said to have been built by King Nebuchadnezzar II in the 6th century BCE to console his homesick queen, Amytis, who missed the forests of her native land. Yet when archaeologists began excavating Babylon in the 19th and 20th centuries, they were met with a perplexing absence. No trace of such a structure could be found. How could one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world simply not be there? The mystery deepened with time. Excavators found grand walls, processional avenues, temples, and palaces, but nothing resembling the massive substructures needed to support a man-made mountain of greenery. Scholars began to wonder, had the gardens been exaggerated, misplaced, or entirely mythical? The key breakthrough came not in Babylon, but 300 miles to the north, in Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire. An Assyriologist named Stephanie Daly spent decades piecing together cuneiform texts, Greek accounts, and topographical evidence. She noticed something striking. Some descriptions attributed to Babylonian gardens matched Assyrian engineering techniques, not Babylonian. Moreover, inscriptions from the reign of King Sennacherib, 704 to 681 BCE, boasted of an unprecedented feat, a series of terraced gardens watered by a sophisticated aqueduct and irrigation system. His texts describe a wonder for all people, fed by water raised through screw-like devices centuries before Archimedes. Archaeological excavations at Nineveh revealed remains of an extensive canal network and massive stone aqueducts capable of supplying water to elevated terraces. The quirky twist here is that the Hanging Gardens may never have been in Babylon at all. Instead, classical writers, working from second-hand accounts, may have conflated the two Mesopotamian cities, attributing Sennacherib's grand gardens to the more famous Babylon. Alternatively, later Greek historians might have assumed that any great wonder of Mesopotamia must naturally belong to Nebuchadnezzar's city, not his Assyrian rivals. Scholars still debate whether Dali's theory definitively relocates the gardens. Some argue that evidence in Babylon itself is simply lost beneath modern development or the shifting course of the Euphrates. Others accept Nineveh as the likeliest site, seeing in Sennacherib's inscriptions the pride of a king who wanted to astonish the world. If true, this solution reshapes how we understand the Seven Wonders. The Hanging Gardens weren't lost. They were misattributed, their legend displaced by centuries of retelling. Standing amid the ruins of Nineveh today, with dusty canals still etched into the landscape, it's easy to imagine terraces rising from the earth, fountains spraying, and palms swaying in the dry wind. The wonder wasn't imaginary, it was simply standing in the wrong city all along, lost architects of the rainforest. Deep within the Amazon basin, where vines coil like serpents and the air hums with life, the jungle hides more than animals. For centuries, explorers spoke of strange, geometric clearings glimpsed from above, circles, squares, and intricate patterns carved into the earth. Locals knew of these shapes, but for much of modern history, they were dismissed as natural quirks or the traces of small, scattered tribes. The Amazon, it was assumed, had never hosted large, complex societies. But satellites, drones, and careful archaeology have rewritten that story completely. Beginning in the late 20th century and accelerating in the 2000s, deforestation revealed what the jungle had long concealed. Thousands of massive geoglyphs, earthen structures spanning miles, often connected by straight, planned roads. These were not random clearings. Some formed perfect circles, others squares and complex compound patterns, often oriented with astronomical precision. Beneath the canopy lay the ghostly blueprint of entire civilizations. Radiocarbon dating placed many of these structures between 500 BCE and 1500 CE, meaning they were contemporaneous with, and in some cases predated, the rise of major Andean cultures. Excavations uncovered pottery, tools, and evidence of settled communities with intensive land management. Far from being an untouched wilderness, the pre-Columbian Amazon was engineered. Indigenous peoples used controlled burns, constructed raised fields, and enriched soil through a unique process that created terra preta, or black earth, an extraordinarily fertile soil still found today. A fascinating, quirky detail. Early European explorers, like Francisco de Orellana in the 1540s, described thriving towns and roads along the Amazon River. Later expeditions found nothing, leading scholars to dismiss his accounts as exaggeration or fantasy. It turns out he may have been telling the truth. European diseases likely decimated these populations before later explorers arrived, allowing the forest to reclaim their cities almost completely within a generation. Scholars still debate the scale and organization of these Amazonian societies. Some argue they were small, loosely connected communities sharing cultural practices. Others believe they formed regional networks, rivaling urban civilizations elsewhere. Either way, the image of the Amazon as an untouched, pristine wilderness is now recognized as a colonial myth. The rediscovery of these earthworks represents more than just a new chapter in archaeology. It's a reminder of human adaptability. In one of the planet's most challenging environments, people didn't merely survive, they shaped the land into something ordered, meaningful, and lasting. Flying over parts of Acre or Rondonia today, you can see the faint outlines of circles and squares beneath the thinning jungle canopy, like fingerprints pressed into the earth centuries ago. The architects of the rainforest were neither lost nor primitive. They were simply hidden, their cities wrapped in green silence, until the modern world learned how to look. The Queen in the Shadows. Few figures in ancient history cast as long and seductive a shadow as Cleopatra VII. She ruled Egypt at a time when its independence teetered between Roman ambition and dynastic intrigue. Her alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony made her both a political powerhouse and a cultural icon. Yet, for all the fascination with her life, her death and burial remain among archaeology's most enduring mysteries. Ancient writers agreed on this much. After her suicide in 30 BCE, Cleopatra and Antony were buried together in a royal tomb. But where? For centuries, scholars and treasure hunters scoured Alexandria, where her palace once stood. Unfortunately, much of that ancient city now lies submerged beneath the Mediterranean. Earthquakes and tsunamis in late antiquity caused parts of the royal quarter to slide into the sea. Divers have found sphinxes, columns, and fragments of palaces. Tantalizing, but no tomb. The search then shifted inland toward lesser-known sites along the Nile Delta. One of the most intriguing possibilities lies at Taposiris Magna, a temple complex about 45 kilometers west of Alexandria. Here, archaeologist Kathleen Martinez has led a years-long excavation, driven by the hypothesis that Cleopatra, a ruler who styled herself as the living embodiment of Isis, might have chosen burial in a temple dedicated to the goddess rather than a traditional royal necropolis. Excavations have uncovered coins bearing Cleopatra's image, statues of Isis, and intricate underground tunnels and chambers, all suggestive, though the elusive tomb has yet to be found. A quirky twist in this story involves ancient propaganda. Roman writers often painted Cleopatra's death as a theatrical, even decadent act, famously involving an asp. But modern forensic analysis of available accounts suggests she likely used a fast-acting poison, perhaps brought in, a comb or vessel, to ensure a controlled, dignified end. Some fringe theories even claimed her tomb was intentionally left empty or constructed as a decoy to prevent Roman desecration. Scholars still debate whether Cleopatra's burial site lies underwater in the sunken royal quarter or inland in a temple like Taposiris Magna. Each new excavation season brings whispers of a breakthrough, but so far the Queen remains elusive. What makes this mystery especially poignant is its symbolism. Cleopatra was the last pharaoh, the final voice of a lineage stretching back 3 millennia. Her tomb, wherever it lies, marks the moment Egypt's ancient sovereignty passed into Roman hands. Standing among the temple ruins at Taposiris Magna today, the hot wind whipping off the desert, one can imagine a funeral procession winding through columns, bearing the last queen to her resting place in the shadows of her beloved goddess. Somewhere beneath sand or sea, the queen still waits, not forgotten, only hidden. The day Pompeii froze. For generations, the story of Pompeii has been told with cinematic certainty. On August 24th, 79 CE, Mount Vesuvius erupted without warning, burying the Roman city in ash and pumice, freezing it in time. For centuries afterward, the city lay entombed beneath meters of volcanic debris, its final day preserved like a tableau, people mid-stride, food still on stoves, frescoes vivid on walls. But in recent years, careful archaeology has quietly shifted the timeline of this iconic disaster. The day Pompeii died may not have been in August at all. The first clues came not from geology, but from the humble details of everyday life. Excavators found pomegranates, a fruit that ripens in autumn, stored in the city's houses. Amphorae contained wine made from freshly harvested grapes, something that would not have existed in August. The clothing found on many victims was also too heavy for the late summer heat, suggesting cooler autumn weather. Then came an extraordinary discovery in 2018, a charcoal inscription hastily scrawled on a house wall by a builder. It read, in translation, 610 K NOV, the 16th day before the calends of November. In our calendar, that's October 17th. The note was dated to the current year, meaning it was written just days before the eruption. This inscription, likely left by a worker during renovation, provided the most direct evidence yet that the eruption happened in late October, not August. Geological studies backed this up, identifying wind patterns and eruption dynamics more consistent with autumn conditions. A quirky twist, the August 24th date likely originated from an 18th century misreading of manuscripts by Pliny the Younger, the Roman eyewitness whose letters to Tacitus provide the only surviving contemporary account of the disaster. Early editors inserted the August date and it stuck, repeated in textbooks, documentaries, and even carved into museum plaques for centuries. Scholars still debate whether the eruption date was late October or perhaps early November, as some tree ring analyses suggest, but the consensus has shifted decisively away from August. This small correction has profound effects. It reframes the rhythm of daily life in Pompeii at the time of disaster, harvest season instead of high summer, and it illustrates how even the most settled pieces of history can change with one stroke of charcoal on a wall. As excavators continue to uncover frescoed rooms, carbonized bread, and petrified loaves, they aren't just unearthing objects. They're peeling back layers of narrative built over centuries. History, like ash, can harden around a story. And sometimes it takes one quiet inscription to remind us that even the most famous days in history are not immune to revision. The ramp, hidden in the heart of stone. Few mysteries have captured popular imagination like the construction of Egypt's Great Pyramid at Giza. Built more than 4,500 years ago for Pharaoh Khufu, it rises with mathematical precision. 2.3 million limestone blocks, some weighing up to 80 tons, arranged in a monument that has endured millennia. Ancient historians speculated wildly about its building methods. Modern observers have invoked everything from lost technologies to alien assistance. For centuries, the true logistics of pyramid construction remained elusive, especially the question of how the massive stones were raised hundreds of feet into the air without cranes or modern machinery. But a recent discovery has brought a striking new answer. The ramp wasn't outside the pyramid, it was inside. The key came from an unexpected source, a long-lost quarry in the eastern desert at Hatnub. There, archaeologists uncovered a well-preserved system of ramps, staircases, and post holes carved into the quarry's slope. The design revealed that massive stone blocks were hauled upward on sledges, with ropes wrapped around wooden posts acting as pulleys. Workers could pull the stones at steep angles using this clever counterforce system, a feat previously thought impossible with the technology of the time. This quarry ramp provided a missing piece of the puzzle. If such ramps existed at the quarries, similar systems could have been used within the pyramid itself, following a spiral or zigzagging course built into the structure as it rose. The internal ramp theory, first proposed by architect Jean-Pierre Houdin, gained traction when microgravity scans of the Great Pyramid revealed mysterious voids spiraling upward inside. Spaces consistent with a hidden construction ramp, later filled in or concealed. A quirky fringe theory once suggested the Egyptians used levitation, or poured limestone like concrete. these have no evidence. The ramp evidence, by contrast, aligns with the Egyptians' known mastery of stone engineering, ropework, and labour organisation. Scholars still debate the exact combination of methods, whether external straight ramps, internal spiral ramps, or both were used in stages, but the Hatnub ramp system proved that Egyptians had the mechanical ingenuity to haul massive blocks at steep gradients, something once dismissed as impossible. Imagine the scene: teams of workers hauling sledges up internal passageways, chanting in rhythm to coordinate their effort, wooden posts creaking under tension, stone grinding slowly upward through the pyramid's growing corridors. No aliens, no lost civilization, just brilliant, disciplined engineering hidden in plain sight, or, more accurately, inside the stone. Today, laser scans and muon imaging continue to probe the Great Pyramid's interior, searching for more hidden voids that might confirm the full path of these ramps. If and when they are fully mapped, we may finally understand the pyramid not as an enigma, but as an extraordinary feat of human planning, a ramped heartbeat rising within one of history's greatest monuments, the war behind the epic. For millennia, Homer's Iliad stood at the threshold between legend and history. Its verses described a mighty war between Greeks and Trojans, a decade-long siege, heroic duels, gods meddling in human affairs. Scholars long debated whether Troy ever existed outside the poet's imagination. By the 18th century, most considered it purely mythological. Then, in the late 19th century, a determined and controversial German businessman named Heinrich Schliemann set out to prove otherwise. His excavations in northwestern Turkey, at a site known as Hisarlik, changed everything. Beneath a windswept hill, Schliemann uncovered layer upon layer of ancient settlement, 9 major cities built one atop another. He announced triumphantly that he had found Troy. His methods were crude by modern standards. In his eagerness, he destroyed some upper layers to reach what he believed was Homer's city. The treasure of Priam he claimed to find was later dated to a period centuries earlier than the traditional Trojan War. Still, his discovery proved that a powerful city had indeed stood on that spot, commanding a strategic position near the Dardanelles. Later excavations refined the picture. One layer, known as Troy 6-7a, dated to around 1300 to 1180 BCE, showed signs of sudden destruction: collapsed walls, arrowheads embedded in masonry, burned layers. The city was wealthy, with formidable fortifications, the kind that could inspire tales of epic siege. A quirky twist. While Schliemann envisioned armies of Greeks in bronze armour storming Troy, modern scholars paint a more complex picture. The Trojan War may have been a series of conflicts between Mycenaean Greeks and Anatolian city-states, compressed into one grand narrative by poets over centuries. Trade rivalries, control of shipping routes, and shifting alliances likely played a greater role than the Abdu, Kishan of Helen. Scholars still debate which, if any, of the archaeological layers corresponds to Homer's Troy. Some argue Troy VI, destroyed by earthquake, inspired the epic, with later layers adding war imagery. Others point to Troy VII, with its evidence of violent destruction. There's also debate about whether a single war took place at all, or if multiple conflicts became mythically fused into one legendary siege. Standing on the citadel mound today, gazing over the windy plains of Hisarlik toward the Aegean, it's easy to imagine the silhouettes of ships on the horizon, armies gathering at dawn. The stones don't confirm every line of Homer, but they anchor the story in real soil. The Trojan War may not have happened exactly as sung. No gods hurling spears from Olympus, but it grew from real wars, real cities, and real ambitions. Myth and history met at Troy, not as opposites, but as intertwined threads. The legend gave the war immortality. Archaeology gave it bones. Water beneath the sands. In the harsh, sun-scorched landscapes of North Africa, survival once depended on a kind of invisible architecture. Vast underground networks of water channels known as qanats or fogaras. When the Moors expanded across arid regions during the first millennium CE, they didn't conquer the desert through brute force, they outsmarted it. For centuries, historians puzzled over how these communities sustained large populations and fertile oases in environments where surface water was almost non-existent. The answer was buried beneath their feet. Qanats were ingenious systems that tapped underground aquifers or mountain springs, then gently sloped tunnels for miles to deliver water to settlements and fields without pumps or evaporation losses. Vertical shafts were dug at regular intervals for ventilation and maintenance, creating a dotted line across the desert that, from above, looks like a string of perfectly aligned wells. Once completed, the water flowed continuously, powered only by gravity. This technology was not uniquely Moorish. Its origins trace back to ancient Persia more than 2,500 years ago, but the Moors perfected and expanded it, adapting the technique to the challenging terrains of North Africa and Iberia. Their qanats turned barren plains into thriving agricultural zones, sustaining crops like dates, olives, and citrus that would become staples of Mediterranean cuisine. A quirky detail often overlooked, many medieval travellers wrote of crossing empty deserts, only to suddenly stumble upon green valleys and towns that seemed to appear from nowhere. Beneath those sands, entire civilizations were quietly channeling rivers underground. Some of these qanats stretched over 30 kilometres, built with astonishing precision, using only hand tools, sighting rods, and geometry. In places like Morocco's Tafilalt Oasis and Algeria's Tuat Regi, remnants of these fogaras still operate today, centuries after their construction. Archaeologists studying abandoned qanats found that they were maintained through communal labour systems, with strict social rules governing water distribution. This invisible infrastructure wasn't just engineering, it was social order carved into the earth. Scholars still debate the full scale of these networks during the height of Moorish power. Some argue they supported regional trade hubs that rivaled cities along major rivers. Others see them as critical links in caravan routes that stretched across the Sahara. Either way, they reveal a forgotten layer of history, a world sustained not by visible monuments, but by hidden veins of water, dug and maintained with astonishing foresight. Standing in the cool, shadowed depths of a surviving qanat shaft today, the contrast with the scorching desert above is startling. Down here, the air is damp and still, the sound of trickling water echoing softly through tunnels carved 1,000 years ago. Long before electric pumps and pipelines, the Moors mastered the art of survival by turning the desert itself into a reservoir, the clock that predated time. In 1901, sponge divers working off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera stumbled upon the wreckage of an ancient Roman ship. Among the bronzes and amphorae, encrusted in centuries of marine growth, they pulled up a corroded lump of gears and plates. At first, it seemed unremarkable, a barnacle-covered mass, barely recognizable as human-made. But when scholars began to examine it, they realized they were holding something that should not have existed. A precision mechanical device from the 1st century BCE, centuries ahead of anything known. Now known as the Antikythera mechanism, this object has been called the world's first analog computer. Inside its corroded shell were dozens of bronze gears, intricately cut with a level of precision that rivaled 18th century clockmaking. Its purpose baffled scholars for decades. Some believed it was an astrolabe, others thought it was a navigational aid. The truth, uncovered through X-rays, 3D scanning, and patient reconstruction, is far more extraordinary. The mechanism could predict the movements of the sun, moon, and planets, calculate lunar phases, track eclipses, and even follow the timing of athletic games like the Olympics. Its front displayed the zodiac and solar calendar, while the back featured complex dials for lunar cycles and eclipses based on the 223-month Saros cycle. Turning a single crank would set the entire system in motion, simulating the heavens with astonishing accuracy. A quirky twist. For years, many assumed such technology was lost with the Greeks, rediscovered only in medieval Europe. But the mechanism proves that Hellenistic engineers mastered gear systems far earlier than anyone imagined. It hints at a lost lineage of craftsmanship and scientific knowledge, workshops capable of making intricate gears that have left no other surviving examples. Scholars still debate exactly who built the Antikythera mechanism. Some link it to the island of Rhodes, a known centre of astronomical study. Others suggest it may have been made by a follower of Archimedes. Its shipwreck context suggests it was being transported, perhaps as a luxury item for a wealthy Roman patron. Equally debated is why such technology disappeared. Did it belong to a tiny circle of elite scholars, too specialised to spread? Did political upheavals and the eventual fall of the Roman world snuff out this thread of mechanical innovation? Whatever the reason, the mechanism remained unique for over a millennium, until complex geared clocks reappeared in medieval Europe. Today, fragments of the device sit in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, while researchers continue to build ever more accurate replicas. Turning the reconstructed crank and watching the dials move is like glimpsing into the intellectual cosmos of the ancient Greeks. The Antikythera mechanism didn't just keep time, it embodied time, centuries before humanity built clocks. The shadow fleet of history. At the close of the Late Bronze Age, around 1200 BCE, the great civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean began to unravel. The Hittite Empire collapsed, Mycenaean palaces burned, Egyptian borders were strained to the brink, and entire cities vanished from the historical record. For centuries, historians called this the Bronze Age collapse, a mysterious, cascading failure that left the ancient world in ruins. Among the most enigmatic forces blamed were the Sea Peoples, a coalition of sea-born raiders who seemed to materialize from nowhere, attacking kingdoms in coordinated waves before vanishing again into obscurity. Their identity became one of archaeology's greatest puzzles. The primary evidence comes from Egyptian inscriptions, particularly the mortuary temple of Ramses III at Medinet Habu. There, hieroglyphic reliefs vividly depict naval battles against strange foreign warriors with feathered headdresses, ox-drawn carts, and unfamiliar ships. Ramses III claimed to have crushed this confederation of the sea, but even his victory inscriptions betray how close Egypt came to disaster. To later historians, the Sea Peoples were like ghosts, appearing fully formed at the climax of history, striking hard, then fading. For decades, theories abounded. Some said they were desperate refugees from natural disasters, like the Thera eruption centuries earlier. Others saw them as displaced Mycenaeans, mercenaries, or even pirates banding together in a time of upheaval. The turning point came as archaeologists compared ceramics, weapon styles, and settlement layers across the Levant, Anatolia, and the Aegean. Gradually, a picture emerged. The Sea Peoples were not a single people, but a network of migrating groups, some likely from the Aegean and western Anatolia, others possibly from Cyprus, or even further west. A quirky detail: Egyptian inscript. Chians actually list some of these groups by name: the Peliset, Checa, Shurdan, and others. The Peliset are widely believed to be the Philistines, who later appear in the Hebrew Bible as the coastal adversaries of the Israelites. Excavations at Philistine sites like Ashkelon and Ekron reveal material culture strikingly Aegean in style, pottery, architecture, and diets that hint at transplanted communities rather than mere raiders. Scholars still debate the precise causes behind their movements. Some point to climate change and drought around 1200 BCE, which would have destabilized food supplies and forced migrations. Others emphasize political fragmentation after the fall of major empires, creating opportunities for mobile groups to strike and settle new lands. It may have been both, a combination of push and pull, catastrophe and opportunism. Whatever their origins, the Sea Peoples were real, and their impact was seismic. They contributed to the collapse of Bronze Age palace economies, redrew population maps, and set the stage for the Iron Age societies that would follow, including the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, the Phoenicians, and classical Greece. Standing before the reliefs at Medinet Habu, where ships clash in stone and feathered warriors leap forever into battle, it's easy to feel their presence as more than myth. They were a shadow fleet, moving with the tide of history, briefly seen, profoundly felt, and then swallowed again by time. The city in the sky, high above the Urubamba River Valley in the Andes, shrouded in mist and clinging to a ridge between cloud forest and jagged peaks, stands Machu Picchu, one of the most breathtaking archaeological sites on Earth. Since its rediscovery by Hiram Bingham in 1911, this lost city of the Incas has fascinated the world. For decades, romantic narratives painted it as a remote fortress, a sacred sanctuary, or even an escape for the last Inca emperors from Spanish conquest. But recent research has quietly reframed its story. Machu Picchu wasn't a last refuge. It was a royal estate, an elite, meticulously planned ceremonial and administrative centre built at the height of Inca power. Constructed around 1450 CE during the reign of Emperor Pachacuti, Machu Picchu was never a city in the conventional sense. It housed only a few hundred inhabitants, mostly retainers and attendants, rather than a bustling urban population. Its carefully terraced slopes, finely cut stone architecture, and integration with the surrounding landscape reveal a site meant for political display and ritual, not defense. The Incas were masters of shaping environments to reflect cosmic order. Mountains were sacred apus, rivers were earthly mirrors of celestial paths, and stone was carved to align with the stars. A fascinating detail lies in its location. Machu Picchu sits at the convergence of multiple sacred landscapes, between two mountains overlooking the river bend and oriented toward astronomical events like the solstices. Structures such as the Intihuatana stone acted as ritual calendars, marking the sun's movements with precision. This wasn't accidental. The Inca elite selected the site for its symbolic resonance as much as its physical majesty. A quirky twist, early explorers assumed Machu Picchu was the fabled Vilcabamba, the last refuge of the Incas after Spanish conquest. It wasn't until the 1960s that Vilcabamba was correctly identified elsewhere. Machu Picchu had never been lost to local people, only to the outside world. Its role was misunderstood not because it was hidden, but because outsiders projected their own romantic stories onto it. Scholars still debate whether Machu Picchu served primarily as a seasonal royal retreat, or if it also held administrative functions for surrounding regions. Some argue that its agricultural terraces produced food mainly for ceremonial feasts, rather than for sustaining a permanent population. Others point to its strategic placement as both symbolic and practical, controlling a key pass between regions of the empire. Today, as visitors walk along its stone terraces at dawn, watching clouds part to reveal jagged peaks bathed in gold, it's easy to understand why the site inspired so many myths. But the truth is just as powerful. Machu Picchu wasn't a forgotten city or a fortress against invaders. It was a carefully curated stage for imperial ritual, a jewel in the crown of the Inca world. The faces that crossed oceans. Scattered across the Gulf Coast of Mexico, colossal stone heads gaze out with impassive expressions. Carved from massive basalt boulders, some weighing more than 20 tons, these Olmec heads are among the most striking and mysterious artifacts of the ancient Americas. Their sheer scale and craftsmanship led early archaeologists to label the Olmecs, 1200 to 400 BCE, the mother culture of Mesoamerica. But their origin, purpose, and meaning puzzled researchers for generations. Some fringe theories even suggested they were evidence of transoceanic visitors, lost African sailors, or even Atlanteans, due to their distinct facial features. The real story, revealed through careful archaeology, is both less sensational and far more illuminating. The Olmec heads were carved by skilled artisans, using stone tools, hammerstones, and abrasion, painstakingly shaping each massive block over weeks or months. The basalt came from distant volcanic sources, sometimes over 60 miles away, and was transported via a network of rivers and human labour to Olmec ceremonial centres like San Lorenzo and La Venta. This alone demonstrates a high degree of organisation and engineering ability, centuries before the rise of the Maya or Aztec civilizations. Each head is unique, with individualized facial features, headdresses, and expressions. Scholars now believe they likely represent rulers, immortalized in stone as guardians of sacred plazas and platforms. Their placement in ceremonial contexts reinforces this interpretation. They were not random sculptures, but symbols of authority, power, and lineage. A quirky twist often overlooked. Several heads were found buried deliberately, sometimes defaced or repositioned. This suggests they weren't static monuments but part of changing political or ritual cycles. Some may have been buried to mark the end of a ruler's lineage, or as offerings during shifts in power. The old theories linking the heads to distant civilizations have been thoroughly debunked. Facial features reflect indigenous Mesoamerican diversity, not foreign visitors. No evidence supports transoceanic contact in this period. Instead, the heads reveal that the Olmec developed their own complex political iconography, one that influenced later Mesoamerican traditions. The concept of portraying rulers in monumental art, seen later in Maya stelae and Aztec stonework, likely has its roots here. Scholars still debate exactly how many heads once existed, and whether they were all portraits of historical rulers or idealized ancestral figures. Some argue that their unique features indicate actual likenesses. Others suggest they represent dynastic archetypes. What's clear is that these sculptures were both technical feats and political statements, monumental faces projecting power across time. Standing before one of these heads today, their features worn smooth by centuries of rain and sun, it's hard not to feel their weight, not just in stone, but in presence. They aren't evidence of forgotten voyagers, they're evidence of a civilization that, long before famous empires rose, shaped stone and power with equal mastery, the long fading of knowledge. For generations, the destruction of the Library of Alexandria has been portrayed as a single apocalyptic event, a grand blaze in which scrolls crackled, knowledge vanished, and civilization was plunged into darkness. The image is almost cinematic, flames licking through marble halls, scholars weeping as the accumulated wisdom of centuries turns to ash. But modern research paints a more nuanced and in many ways more poignant picture. The library didn't die in one night. It faded slowly, battered by politics, neglect, and the changing tides of empire. The Library of Alexandria, founded in the 3rd century BCE under Ptolemaic rule, was more than just a building. It was an institution, a research centre, university and cultural magnet that aimed to collect all the world's knowledge. Ships arriving at Alexandria's great harbour were searched for scrolls, which were copied, sometimes confiscated, for the library's shelves. Scholars there translated texts, debated philosophy, and mapped the stars. At its height, it may have held hundreds of thousands of scrolls, representing works from Greece, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, India, and beyond. The first major blow likely came in 48 BCE, during Julius Caesar's civil war. Accounts suggest his troops set fire to ships in the harbour, and the flames spread to part of the city. Ancient writers disagree on whether the library itself burned, or just nearby warehouses containing scroll copies. Regardless, Alexandria remained a scholarly hub afterward, suggesting the main library survived in some form. Subsequent centuries brought further damage. In the 3rd century CE, during the reign of Emperor Aurelian, fighting in the city's streets destroyed parts of the Bruchion district, where the library and its daughter library in the Serapeum temple were located. Later, in 391 CE, as Christianity rose to impede, royal dominance, pagan temples were suppressed. The Serapeum was destroyed by Christian mobs, and with it, likely the last institutional remnants of the library. By then, centuries of political upheaval, shifting cultural priorities, and economic decline had already thinned its collections. A quirky twist. Medieval Arabic sources mention a later burning of the library during the Muslim conquest in 642 CE. Most historians now see this as a legend created centuries after the fact. By that time, the library no longer existed in its classical form. Its destruction was not a single act, but a drawn-out unravelling. Scholars still debate exactly when the last scroll was lost, or when the library ceased functioning as an institution. Some believe remnants survived in private collections or small, scholarly circles long after its main halls fell silent. Others see the Serapeum's destruction as the final symbolic end. What's striking is how the library's myth of a single fiery death reflects our yearning for neat narratives, a single villain, a single moment when light was snuffed out. The reality is more complex and, in some ways, more tragic. Knowledge didn't vanish overnight. It eroded, bit by bit, as politics shifted, patrons disappeared, and curiosity moved elsewhere. Standing on the site today, among the modern library's gleaming glass panels, it's hard not to imagine the layered silences of the past. Scrolls not burned, but simply left unread. Scholars' voices fading not in screams but in whispers. How to lift a mountain. Across Egypt, obelisks rise like frozen rays of sunlight, monolithic spires of granite carved with hieroglyphs and set upright with astonishing precision. Some tower over 30 metres high and weigh hundreds of tons. For centuries, travellers stood in awe before these needle-like monuments, wondering, how did ancient builders, without cranes or modern machinery, quarry, transport, and raise such immense stones? It was a mystery so enduring that even Renaissance engineers speculated wildly. Only in recent decades have Egyptologists, engineers, and experimental archaeologists pieced together a surprisingly elegant solution. The journey began at the quarries of Aswan, hundreds of kilometres upriver. Here, in the shimmering heat, lies the famous unfinished obelisk, a colossal block still partly attached to bedrock. Its smooth sides and tool marks reveal the ancient technique. Workers chipped away the stone using dolerite pounders, a harder rock, creating a trench around the obelisk. To detach the base, they likely used wooden wedges soaked in water to expand and crack the stone beneath, a slow, precise process. Once freed, the obelisk was transported down the Nile during the flood season. Barges specially constructed for heavy loads carried the massive stones, aided by the buoyancy of the river. Reliefs from the reign of Hatshepsut depict obelisks being towed by fleets of boats, ropes taut, sails harnessing the wind downstream toward temple sites. The greatest puzzle remained: how to raise the obelisk from horizontal on its barge to upright on a stone pedestal without modern cranes. Fringe theories once invoked lost anti-gravity techniques or ramps stretching impossibly far, but experimental work shows a far more human answer. Builders likely constructed earthen ramps and cradles, gradually tilting the obelisk upward using ropes, wooden beams, and pits. By carefully removing sand from beneath the base while pulling the top with ropes, the obelisk could be walked into a vertical position in a controlled pivot, an immense but achievable feat of coordination. A quirky twist. The Romans were so impressed by this technology that centuries later, when they moved obelisks to Rome, they copied Egyptian techniques, using sand pits and massive rope systems. One famous Roman engineer even posted guards to execute anyone who spoke during the raising of an obelisk, fearing a single mistake could topple the monument. Scholars still debate whether every obelisk followed exactly the same method. Some may have been erected using deep pits, others with inclined planes or levered systems. But the fundamental principle remains consistent: patient engineering, gravity, and teamwork, not mystical powers. Standing before the soaring obelisks at Karnak or Luxor today, it's easy to forget the labour that set them there. Imagine the creak of ropes under strain, the shouted commands, the final thunderous thud as the obelisk slots into its base and rises to meet the sun. These monuments were not lifted by miracles, but by human hands mastering stone, sand, and physics. The desert city found from space. For centuries, Arab legend spoke of a city lost beneath the sands, Iram of the Pillars, or Ubar, a place of wealth and trade that angered God with its arrogance and was swallowed by the desert. Poets described it as a city like no other, with towering columns and bustling markets at the edge of the empty quarter. The Rub al-Khali, the largest sand desert in the world. Many dismiss the story as myth, a mirage of memory. Yet in the late 20th century, a blend of satellite imaging and good old-fashioned fieldwork revealed something extraordinary. The lost city was real. The breakthrough came in the 1980s, when NASA's space shuttles carried radar technology capable of peering beneath thin layers of sand. Archaeologists, working with satellite specialists, analysed images of the Rub al-Khali and identified faint ancient caravan routes, trails etched into the desert by centuries of camel traffic. These routes converged on a single point in Oman's Dhofar region, near a site called Shiza. On the ground, excavations revealed a collapsed limestone fortress built around a deep water source, a key node on the incense trade route where caravans carrying frankincense and myrrh once paused before crossing the desert. As the dig expanded, archaeologists uncovered pottery, tools, and evidence of long-distance trade with Rome, Persia, and India. The fortress had stood on top of a natural limestone cavern. Over time, the cavern roof weakened and eventually collapsed, swallowing part of the settlement and giving rise to the legend of a city consumed by sand. A quirky twist: early Western explorers searching for Ubar were often led astray by mirages and shifting dunes, sometimes chasing cities that turned out to be nothing but wind-carved formations. One 1930s expedition wandered for weeks, convinced they were on the brink of discovery, only to find nothing but desert silence. It took satellite eyes from space to reveal what centuries of human wandering could not. Scholars still debate whether Shiza was Iram of the Pillars or simply one of several major trade hubs in the region that fed the legend. Some argue that Iram referred to a region or network of settlements rather than a single city. But what's certain is that Ubar was no mythic Atlantis. It was a thriving commercial centre, part of the incense trade that connected Arabia to the wider ancient world. Standing at the site today, with the wind sweeping across the empty landscape, it's easy to see how stories grew. The collapsed sinkhole yawns at the site's centre, a literal void that swallowed part of a fortress. Around it, the desert stretches in all directions, vast and indifferent. Ubar was not lost to divine wrath but to geology, shifting trade patterns and the slow burial of history beneath drifting sand. The desert did not lie, it remembered, the murder frozen in ice. In 1991, two hikers trekking high in the Ötztal Alps near the Austrian-Italian border stumbled upon what they thought was a mountaineer's corpse emerging from melting ice. But when archaeologists arrived, they realized this was no ordinary discovery. The body was over 5,000 years old, preserved almost perfectly in the glacial cold. Nicknamed Ötzi the Iceman, he became one of the most extraordinary windows into Copper Age Europe, a man frozen at the moment of his death, carrying with him not only tools and clothes, but secrets that would take decades to unravel. Ötzi's preservation was astonishing. His skin, organs, clothing, and even his last meal survived in remarkable detail. He wore a woven grass cape, leggings made from goat hide, and a coat of deerskin stitched together with sinew. His shoes were insulated with grass and bearskin, a sophisticated cold-weather design. His toolkit included a copper axe with a yew-wood handle, a flint knife, arrows, and a birch bark container for carrying embers, suggesting he travelled with fire. For years, researchers assumed Ötzi had died in a snowstorm, trapped by bad weather, but forensic techniques transformed the mystery. In 2001, CT scans revealed an arrowhead embedded in his left shoulder, which had severed a major artery. Traces of blood on his gear matched multiple individuals, suggesting a violent encounter before his death. Microscopic analysis of his wounds showed he bled out quickly, within minutes. He hadn't been lost, he had been killed. A quirky detail, analysis of Ötzi's stomach contents showed his last meal was dried ibex meat, einkorn wheat and fat, eaten less than 2 hours before his death. Pollen trapped in his gut revealed he died in early summer, not autumn as originally thought. Even the tattoos on his body, more than 60 simple black lines, weren't decorative but likely thyrsus. Therapeutic, placed near joints suffering from wear, hinting at a form of prehistoric acupuncture. Scholars still debate the exact circumstances of his final hours. Some envision Ötzi fleeing from enemies after a skirmish, possibly ambushed while crossing the pass. Others suggest he was part of a larger conflict or personal vendetta. The arrow wound, lack of defensive injuries, and position of his body suggest he was shot from behind, then collapsed almost immediately. Perhaps the most haunting part of the story is his biography, reconstructed from microscopic clues. Isotope analysis of his teeth and bones traced his childhood to a specific valley in northern Italy. His tools show intimate knowledge of his environment. His body, perfectly preserved, allows us to see him not as a mythic figure, but as a real man with calloused hands, sore joints, and a violent end. Standing in the climate-controlled chamber of the South Tyrol Museum today, Ötzi lies curled in the same position he fell, ice crystals clinging to his ancient skin. He is both victim and storyteller, his body a forensic archive whispering across 5 millennia, the mystery tools reborn. In museum display cases across Europe, small bronze objects puzzled archaeologists for centuries. Roughly the size of a fist, each consisted of a hollow dodecahedron, 12 pentagonal faces, each pierced by a circular hole of varying size, with small knobs on each corner. No ancient text mentions them. No inscriptions mark their surfaces. Hundreds have been found, mostly in Roman military regions dating from the 2nd to 4th centuries CE. Their purpose was completely unknown. Theories ranged from the practical to the fantastical, dice for gaming, astronomical calculators, candlestick holders, religious artifacts, or even knitting tools for gloves. For decades, the Roman dodecahedron was an archaeological enigma. The breakthrough didn't come from a single dramatic discovery, but from a combination of experimental archaeology and re-examining where these artifacts were found. Most dodecahedra turned up in military contexts or rural sites, not urban temples. They lacked wear patterns consistent with gaming or continuous handling, and no two are exactly alike, suggesting local manufacture for practical use rather than standardized cult objects. One of the most compelling explanations emerged when researchers tested them as measuring instruments. By holding the dodecahedron at eye level and looking through pairs of opposite holes, they realized that, depending on the hole combination, the field of view changed in predictable ways. When calibrated, this allowed users to measure distances. For example, the height of distant objects, like flagpoles or walls. Roman surveyors or artillery units may have used them to calculate ranges, align constructions, or plan battle works, much like a simple optical rangefinder. A quirky twist. A group of historical reenactors once demonstrated using a replica dodecahedron to knit tight-fitting gloves by looping L through the holes, a theory that became unexpectedly popular online. While technically possible, there's no archaeological evidence linking these objects to textile work. The measuring theory, on the other hand, fits better with their distribution and Roman engineering practices. Scholars still debate whether all dodecahedra served the same function. Some may have been multi-purpose tools or had symbolic meanings layered onto practical use, as often happened in Roman military life. The lack of inscriptions remains odd. Perhaps their function was so commonplace that no explanation was needed. Today, these enigmatic bronzes stand as a reminder that not all mysteries end with a single eureka moment. Sometimes solutions emerge through patient reconstruction, through hands-on experimentation and context, not just texts. The Roman dodecahedron didn't belong to aliens or secret societies. It likely belonged to surveyors, engineers, or soldiers, people using geometry to shape their world. Pick one up, look through its twin holes, and the landscape snaps into measured focus. An object once shrouded in mystery becomes, suddenly, a tool reborn. The Temple Before Time. In southeastern Turkey, on a limestone plateau overlooking the Harran Plain, stands a site that has rewritten the story of civilization, Göbekli Tepe. First excavated in the 1990s, this complex of massive T-shaped stone pillars arranged in circular enclosures is unlike anything else from its time. Radiocarbon dating places its construction around 9600 BCE, thousands of years before Stonehenge, the pyramids, or even the rise of agriculture in the region. For decades, historians believed monumental architecture only emerged after humans settled in farming communities. Göbekli Tepe shattered that timeline. Here was proof that hunter-gatherers, not farmers, built some of the earliest known temples. The pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons, are intricately carved with reliefs of animals: leopards, vultures, snakes, scorpions, wild boars. These are not crude etchings, but sophisticated artworks created with flint tools. The enclosures themselves were carefully arranged, with central monoliths flanked by others in deliberate patterns. Excavations suggest the site was not a settlement. There are no domestic buildings, hearths, or refuse pits typically associated with habitation. Instead, Göbekli Tepe was a ritual centre built and used by groups of mobile foragers who came together seasonally. A fascinating detail: the site was deliberately buried around 8000 BCE. The enclosures were filled in with debris and soil, effectively preserving them for millennia. This act of burial seems intentional, perhaps marking a ritual closure of the site's use, or a shift in religious or social practices. A quirky twist. When Göbekli Tepe was first unearthed, some fringe voices immediately claimed it was evidence of a lost advanced civilization, Atlantis, aliens, or forgotten sages. But careful stratigraphic analysis and dating made clear that it was built by local communities using Stone Age tools, their ingenuity rooted not in lost technology but in complex social organisation and spiritual vision. Scholars still debate why Göbekli Tepe was built and what rituals took place there. Some argue it was a communal gathering site that helped catalyse the transition to agriculture, that shared ritual spaces encouraged groups to settle nearby. Others see it as evidence of spiritual life already flourishing before farming, proving that belief systems may have driven the creation of complex societies, not the other way around. Standing among the pillars today, their carvings still crisp against the Anatolian sky, it's hard not to feel a quiet awe. These stones were raised by hands that had never seen a city, never planted a crop, yet imagined a sacred architecture that endured for millennia. Göbekli Tepe reminds us that civilization didn't begin with walls and kings, it began with gatherings, symbols, and shared imagination. It is, quite literally, a temple before time. Conclusion. Across deserts, seas, mountains, and buried cities, these 25 solved mysteries reveal something profound. For centuries, humans have spun legends to fill the gaps in our knowledge. Alien builders, vanished continents, sudden infernos. Yet, time and science have shown again and again that the true answers, though less fantastical, are infinitely richer. Behind every mystery lies ingenuity, adaptation, and human hands at work. From the Rosetta Stone to Göbekli Tepe, these revelations remind us that history isn't static. It's a living puzzle, constantly reshaped by discovery. The world's great enigmas are not fading away, they're coming into focus. Slowly, methodically, one buried clue at a time.